thank you to our eminent students at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, for this excellent performance of a self-composed piece of music. Prime Minister, Excellencies, friends of the Arctic, but above all today, their Moon Prize laureate. The International Moon Prize for Outstanding Research related to the Arctic recognizes exceptional contributions to our understanding of this unique and rapidly changing part of the world, the Arctic. Established jointly by Academia Borealis, the Academy of Science and Letters of Northern Norway, Tromsø Research Foundation, and UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, the prize every second year honors excellent research related to and of immense importance to and for the Arctic. The prize is named after Henrik Moen, the founder of Norwegian meteorology, whose work supported early polar expeditions and contributed to the foundation of modern Arctic science. I dare to say, ladies and gentlemen, that the Moon Prize is more important than ever, partially because the Arctic is changing fast, faster than almost any region on the Earth. Ice levels are shrinking, ecosystems are transforming, and climate systems are being reshaped with consequences far beyond the polar circle. These changes have severe consequences for local communities and indigenous peoples, yes, but also for global weather patterns, sea level rise, and even geopolitical relations. These are not distant problems, they are global issues. Scientific evidence, ladies and gentlemen, and the insight from Arctic research directly inform how the world understands climate change and help us prepare to the response. At a time when the geopolitical interest in the Arctic, from shipping routes to natural resources and security issues, is intensifying, the need for sound scientific knowledge and evidence-based policies has never been more important. And yesterday, the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs reminded us that the robust methodology, or the toolbox or craft of science, if you will, that really brings about trustworthy insight, which should be and is in demand. The Moon Prize highlights research that not only advances science, but also bridges the gap between academic knowledge, practical solutions, and international collaboration. The prize consists of a financial contribution of 2 million Norwegian kroner, made possible by generous philanthropist Trond Moen, and also a diploma and a photo taken by the photographer and Professor Audun Rikardsen of a freshwater Arctic char from Svalbard. The steering committee has, after recommendation from the scientific committee, decided to award the 2026 Moon Prize to Professor John P. Small for his pioneering research on Arctic freshwater ecosystems. In particular, has his work used paleoecological methodologies to detect environmental change over time, provide critical insight into the effects of climate warming, pollution, and biodiversity loss in some of the Arctic's most sensitive environments. His work offers tools that help scientists and policymakers to interpret long-term ecological shifts and guide response to rapid environmental change. Now, I do have the immense honor to call upon the Norwegian Prime Minister, who also enjoyed the title of Doctor Honoris Causa, Honorary Doctor at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, to address the Moon Prize and the 2026 laureates, and present also the prize. Please, Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre.
Well, dear friends, I don't deserve applause for that doctorate. That was a very generous thing by the university, but let us give a big hand of applause to this year's Moon Prize winner, Dr. John Small. And it is for me a great honor on behalf of the Norwegian government to extend that congratulation. And let me put this into some context. I explained to the audience earlier today that when I became foreign minister in 2005, we defined the High North as our strategic priority. And in our national Arctic policy strategy, we defined a few stable pillars to orient our policies, and I think those pillars still stand firm. Two of them, obviously, knowledge and international cooperation. This room tells a lot about that. Other pillars are presence in the High North. We are here. Vibrant cities and communities, and the rich natural resources. But perhaps if I were to lift two of them as guiding principles for everything we do, knowledge, science, research, people's curiosity and search for answers. That has to be the underpinning issue. I was asked by journalists, is your policies science-based? And I think in the final stage, making political decisions is about deliberation that has to weigh a number of issues. But input to that process has to be based on science and knowledge. The prestigious Moon Award this year is about Arctic and climate change. In this way, in order to understand and respond to the environmental changes caused by global warming, we need to measure the very changes in the ecosystems. And as I said this morning, the Arctic is a prime stage for that. Perhaps the canary in the island, in the mill, giving us signs that have huge implications far beyond. And Professor Small's pioneering research has given us valuable tools to do so. Professor, you are honored for your role in identifying stressors of environmental change in the Arctic and their consequences. More precisely, and I must admit this is not my area of expertise, that's why we have scientific prizes. He has demonstrated great leadership in paleoecology, studying the sediments and water quality in Arctic lakes undergoing environmental change. That may concern pollution, climate change, loss of biological diversity. And it illustrates that Professor Small's career reflects the role that science can play and should play important role in solving real-life challenges and providing that information to policymakers in a way that is understandable and that we can act upon them. And this reminds us also of the pioneering work scientists for this prize, after what this prize is named, by Henrik Mohn. Rector, you alluded to him. Born in Bergen, 1835, started out as a physicist and astronomer and went on to devote himself to meteorology. He served as a Director General of the Norwegian Meteorological Institute from its inception in 1866 to 1913. They had weather at that time as well. He played an important role in the organization that was the forerunner for today's World Meteorological Organization, so important for also climate observations. And he pioneered our understanding of the Arctic weather systems. At the time, Henrik Mohn provided a number of polar expeditions with meteorological equipment, among them Fridtjof Nansen's Fram expedition. Now, Henrik Mohn was the great-uncle of the father of Trond Mohn, sitting on the first row. Trond, you will raise. There he is. And it speaks to Trond Mohn's engagement in this society's development that he has named the prize recognizing excellence in Arctic research after him. And we need excellence. Professor Small has contributed to more than 700 publications. He is the recipient of a number of scientific awards. They are testimony to research excellence, the fruits of more than 4 decades of fieldwork and research across the Arctic. And it bears mentioning that Professor Small himself eagerly points out that scientific output on this scale is teamwork, never something done by one individual. What brings real results is close cooperation between colleagues. As I understand, Professor, financial contributors, your own Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, not to mention hundreds of PhD, master, and bachelor students over the years, a big team. In underlining the importance of all your collaborators, you demonstrate beautifully true leadership in scientific pursuit, and for this too, we thank you. Let me then end by saying that as polar nations, two of the polar nations, Norway and Canada, emphasize the importance of facts and knowledge-based approach to our Arctic policies. And it's a sign of our times that Canada and Norway are getting closer. We tell our Canadian colleague that we see you as an honorary Nordic. And that's a compliment going both ways. So as allies in NATO, as partner in the Arctic, and also in these times when we need to stand up to fundamental principles, Canada is closer than ever. For me and for other Norwegian and Canadian politicians, we need scientists to help us in that work. Scientists like you, Professor. Your work has not only transformed scientific understanding of Arctic system, but also supplied critical data for us policymakers as we grapple in political decision with climate risk, freshwater security, biodiversity, Arctic sustainability. And I've seen and been referred to, Professor, a quote from you. Quote, "It's our job as scientists to present the facts clearly without bias and let society make informed decisions," end of quote. How true. Doesn't make decisions easier, but when they are informed, at least we have an opportunity to move forward. As simple as that. So, Professor Dr. John Small, we thank you deeply for your outstanding contributions to environmental science and policy in the Arctic. You truly deserve the prize, and may I ask you to come to the stage, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Prime Minister, Professor Dag Gunnarsson, honored guests, colleagues, friends of the Arctic. First, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for those very kind words. And of course, I'd also like to thank the organizers of this incredible conference and UIT and the other colleagues, especially Sigrid Ag and Kjetil Rudman, who made our visit here, Julie's and I visit here, very pleasant and very successful. Of course, I also wish to thank the Moon Prize Committee for this tremendous honor, as well as my nominator, Dr. Nancy Ross, who's the Vice Principal of Research at Queen's University, and Dr. Mona Rahman, who facilitated the nomination. I would also like to thank Queen's University in general, which has provided an excellent teaching and research environment, allowing my students and myself to thrive. As well, I'd like to thank the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, as well as other funding agencies like the Polar Continental Shelf Program, that have stood by me since I was a graduate student. Most importantly, though, I would like to thank the over 100 graduate students and even more undergraduate students that have passed through my lab, the Paleoecological Environmental and Assessment Research Lab, which we call PEARL, and gone on to develop remarkable careers of their own, many of them in academia, but also in key government, NGO, or consultancy positions. Science is a team sport, and I've always had excellent teams. When getting an award like this, I sometimes feel, to use sort of a Canadian comparison, that I'm like the coach of a hockey team and we win the national championship, but I'm the only one on the ice holding the trophy. That's definitely not how it works. The contributions of my students and other collaborators have been absolutely astounding and remarkable. If I deserve any award at all, it is for attracting highly qualified and hardworking and dedicated people who are a pleasure to be with and are my friends. Nonetheless, some people deserve some special recognition, which I'd like to acknowledge here. The late Dr. Weston Blake Jr., who actually did his PhD on Svalbard, brought me up to the Arctic as a 20-something as one of his expeditions and allowed me to join his group of geologists. And I was a biologist at the time. I've become more of a geologist in the meantime. Once I was a professor, Dr. Marianne Douglas, she was then a graduate student, but when she got her professorship, she led many high Arctic expeditions with me. Several long-term collaborators from my lab, two research scientists, Dr. Neil Micheludi and Dr. Kathleen Ruland, have been key to our Arctic work, co-mentoring students and leading research programs. And many collaborations with Dr. Jules Blais of the University of Ottawa and his team have really enhanced much of our research. Importantly, my Arctic fieldwork would be a disaster were it not for the technical skills of the late John Glue, and more recently, over the last 15 years, Chris Grooms. And of course, the unending support and patience of my wife, Julie Gatilius Clark, who's here today, has been critical. There are many more that I could mention. Just as it's a pleasure to have worked with such a dedicated group of scientists, it always feels very odd to receive an award for doing something that you love. I have always maintained that it's truly a privilege to be a professor, creating knowledge, which we call research, and then transferring or communicating that knowledge, what we typically call teaching and outreach. Our lab works on ponds, lakes, and rivers, basically water, and what lives in water. Water is essential to life, but our water resources are under tremendous threat from a wide variety of stressors, not least of which is climate change. Although we work on present-day lake systems, our key focus is looking at the history of lakes, and from that we learn a lot about ecosystem change. History is important. It helps us understand where we are going, and it tells us where we have been. It reminds us of our successes, but it warns us of our failures. Nature is very slow to pardon our mistakes. Using our paleo approaches, we have studied a wide spectrum of environmental issues which require using the proper spatial but also the temporal or time scales. For example, nowhere in the world is climate change more visible than in the Arctic. And we are seeing the tremendous consequences of this, including the entire disappearance of some aquatic ecosystems such as shallow ponds, which are evaporating away. Certainly showing how climate change is affecting ecosystems has been key, but also examining how pollutants coming from the south and also from local sources in northern communities have affected freshwater systems, including past industrial operations such as Arctic mining. The effects of mines have been especially egregious in northern regions, as often once the ore has been extracted, owners abandon the mines and similarly abandon any cleanup efforts. Many of these mines are still leaking contaminants decades and sometimes centuries after the closure of the mine. Of course, northern peoples, and especially indigenous peoples, are on the front line of both climate change and industrial degradation in the north, even though they had little or nothing to do with the problem. These are issues of social injustice that have to be addressed, which I am happy to report Canada is finally taking a lead in. I am proud of the ways that we have been able to foster the reconciliation process by realizing that our retrospective Western science approaches share many similarities to Indigenous knowledge systems, as both tend to focus on historical information. Our collaborative projects, co-led by Indigenous knowledge holders, are braiding paleolimnology, what we do, with Indigenous knowledge to provide powerful and impactful approaches that focus on post-colonial impacts, critical to advancing ongoing reconciliation processes in Canada and elsewhere. Indigenous people have a critically important voice in these discussions, and, at least in Canada, more recently, I would argue, have had a much stronger voice in these issues. Our view is that braiding our Western science approaches with the Indigenous knowledge systems in a respectful and meaningful way will make the Indigenous voice even stronger. Nonetheless, although some progress has been made, the challenges are daunting. When it comes to Arctic issues, and as an environmental scientist, I often deal with multiple environmental issues. We all know these complications, people in this audience, but we are now dealing not just with multiple stressors, but we're now dealing with polycrises. Yes, there's an environmental crisis, but there's also a social crisis in many northern regions, including food insecurity and related issues, maybe also economic crises in many places, and of course now we also have political crises. Looking back at the makeup of this important conference and the participants and even the past Moon Prize winners, I think it just shows the requirement for these multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches. Scientists, yes, but in collaboration with social scientists, historians, politicians, economists, lawyers, and so forth. Meetings like the Arctic Frontiers Conference and institutes like UiT, the University of Norway, are key to meet these challenges. In summary, I want to emphasize that it has been a privilege for me to work in a university and to work throughout the circumpolar Arctic. As I concluded in a recent book, it seems many researchers go to the Arctic for at most 2 or 3 years and then move on to other, perhaps easier regions. This is understandable, given the logistical constraints, the amount of funding, the never-ending paperwork, the permits, some safety concerns, and so on, related to polar research. There are, however, a few people, like many people in this room, and like myself, I believe, who went to the Arctic maybe once too often, and then we're stuck. We just feel there's something haunting about the place. It just keeps us coming back year after year. It's difficult to describe. We keep going back typically until a medical doctor or a funding agency says no more. Fortunately for me, neither of these have happened yet. And I always have to say that being in the high Arctic has always reminded me of the joy and excitement of being alive. It is worth preserving. Thank you again for this great honor. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of Arctic Frontiers. And what an enriching, energizing start of the day it's already been. Of course, with a keynote speech by the Prime Minister of Norway earlier this morning, and of course, the awarding of the prize to our deserving laureate, Professor Small. Now, we pick up where we left off yesterday with the urgent and recurrent theme of change and collaboration. As we heard from so many people on this stage, today and yesterday, the High North is no longer a place of low tension. It's no secret, of course. It's a region of growing ambition, rising competition, and strategic friction. The Arctic is changing fast. You don't need me to tell you that. And the world is paying close attention. Climate pressures, security demands, community needs, all competing and colliding in the same space. And right at the center of it all, infrastructure, or the lack thereof. This isn't just about ports and runways or military bases on a map. It's about human resilience and how we build that. About long-term security that works for the Arctic, but that also works for the communities and the people who actually live here. So roads, airports, communication, energy, all that is great, but how do we make sure that they do double duty, that they actually serve 2 purposes, civilian life and defense, in one of the toughest environments on Earth? So today we ask some of the hard questions. How do the region's governments attract people, especially the youth, to the North? How do they build in a way that respects indigenous rights, knowledge, and leadership? How do national and local authorities work together with communities and militaries to build this infrastructure that keeps pace with security, yes, but also with climate and social needs, all at the same time? Are they getting the balance right? So without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished panelists, starting with Cecilie Myrseth, who's Minister of Trade and Industry of Norway, Baiba Braja, Foreign Minister of Latvia, Silje Karine Mutka, President of the Sami Parliament of Norway, Nathan Obed, President of the Inuit Tapirit Kanatami, and last but not least, Samu Paukunen, who is the Deputy Director of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to you all. It's wonderful to have you all here with us. And let me begin with you, Minister Myrseth. I know you are from the region. In fact, you were born here in Tromsø. You grew up here. So you know firsthand the kind of infrastructure that exists in the Arctic and what is lagging. What for you is the most pressing needs?
Well, yes, I actually grew up in a really small fjord south of Tromsø, 1,000 inhabitants, and have been a youth here and studying at the Arctic University here in Tromsø. And we need most of all people. We need the people who lives here, stays here, that they will continue to do so, and that we attract new people to come and live here. Because we can talk about the infrastructure, we can talk about the military, the defense, which we are increasing. They are more present in the north because that's necessary. But most of all, we need people to live here in the small and bigger communities. And we have to take care of what's actually Arctic. And there's no one who knows that's better than people who actually live here. Because we have to remember that Arctic is not a museum. And it will never be a museum. Because if we want to strengthen the preparedness, the security, it's all about people. And that's one of the main issues right now. We're growing older. That's a good thing, that we are living longer. But it gives us also some concerns that we have to handle. So I believe that the most important thing we have established in the north is actually the university. Because that means that we get all of the expertise that we need, but on Arctic terms.
But how do you keep the expertise? That is the question.
Exactly, and I think there are several reasons why you should stay here and come here, because this is the most exciting place to be on the planet, if you ask me.
But beyond excitement, I just wonder in terms of infrastructure, not just hard infrastructure, but healthcare, education, the rest of it. How do you make sure that it is attractive enough? Because let's face it, it is a harsh environment. It's a very attractive one, but it's a harsh environment, isn't it? And just briefly to mention that Norway's total preparedness paper warns about the fact that you are facing an aging population, urban migration, and skilled labor shortages. So how do you navigate all of this?
Yes, and that's true, and I think that's not just a Norwegian issue. It's an issue that every politician all over faces. But in the north, we experience it more, and it comes faster than in the rest of the country. And then, as I said, the university is important, but we also have to have attractive jobs. And we have to take care of the climate, the nature. At the same time, we need to make sure that there are things to do here, things to live for. And then businesses, and we have space. We have, as you can see, there are a lot of tourists here in this city, but they're all over the northern part of Norway. And we need energy, of course. We need minerals. And we have to make sure that when we now are putting the long-term plan for defense into action, that the small and medium enterprises also are part of this way. Because that's also part of being prepared. We need the local businesses also to thrive and grow at the same time.
And how much do you need the local input, the respectful partnership with indigenous communities? Because we've been talking a lot about collaboration. To what extent is there true partnership with people who live here, who matter? When you are building the infrastructure in such a fast way, don't you end up perhaps trampling over some of these rights that
Yeah,
people
there
and their
are-
concerns. Yeah.
There are, of course, difficult but important debates, issues we have to address, and we need to find the right balance. We have to make sure that the Sami people's voice are being heard. We have consultations and dialogue. That's important, but that's not the same that we will be able to agree on everything. But we have to understand each other, and we have to make sure that we have these systems in place that do so. And also the local governments has to be heard, because that's all about trust. When we are exploring and are expanding for so many reasons, the trust has to be in place between all of the people who are living here in this beautiful part of the world and our country.
Is the trust in place? And I want to turn to you, because I know that Minister Myrseth has just 5 minutes remaining with us. We will continue the panel, sadly, without you. But Silje Karine Mutka, President of the Sami Parliament of Norway, we talk about military infrastructure expanding so rapidly. Minister Myrseth says, yes, but we are consulting with local indigenous communities. Are you rubber stamping decisions that are being made essentially without you? Or do you really have a say?
I do think it's important that for the Sami communities, the key issue is not whether infrastructure should be developed, but how decisions are made and when indigenous participation takes place. Consultations, they too often happens late after key choices already are made, and this limits real influence and turns participation into a procedure formality rather than substantive process. And I do think that we have to consider that the Sami represents a particularly exposed indigenous reality. The Sami people live across 4 states. On the Russian side of Sami communities are already directly affected by war and violations of international law. Some Sami have been drawn into Russia's unlawful war against Ukraine. So for Sami society, security policy is therefore not theoretical. It is lived across borders, families, and generations. Decisions taken in one capital can have immediate and irreversible consequences elsewhere. And I do think it's very paradoxical. We can see that the world is changing rapidly. We are fully aware of the situation in Halalit Nunat in Greenland, and we know that the international law, it's often put aside from the big states, and they are arguing with a higher kind of reason for that. It could be security reasons, military reasons. It's the same thing we are listening to in our own context, and it worries me because we do have ways of and procedures and consultations, and we have politicians and we have systems, but we are rarely able to show how we can agree, and that is something I find more interesting than stating that we have problems.
But give us a specific, tangible example, just very briefly, before I allow Minister Myrseth to respond. A clear example of one of these violations or your concerns, places where you really truly have not been heard, where you've been ignored and your concerns have been ignored.
Yes.
Is there one or two that you can mention?
I can mention very many. I will mention one. And I think a lot of the people in the audience know about that. It's the Melkøya case. We have actually sued the Energy Department due to lack of consultations, amongst other things. So that doesn't show any kind of process where we can demonstrate how we are taking responsibility together.
But are there benefits too? to
The
the
benefits-
infrastructure that's being built?
We are, of course, as a people, we are just as concerned as everybody else with the situation, the geopolitical situation. We are supporting infrastructure, and also we see the need of defense to be considerate to defense activities, but that cannot happen without us. And that is one of the most strongest messages I have to come with.
Minister Mirsad, your thoughts on what you just heard?
Well, I think that we have to be honest about there are things that we also disagree on, but the important thing then is, of course, to have a good, a constructive dialogue, and I think that's important for both parties when there are issues where we disagree. And when it comes to the specific case, Melkøya, we just have to agree to disagree on that one, because from the government side, we need more energy. That's the one thing. Of course, in Finnmark, that's the part of the Norwegian plan as well. And we need also to cut emissions. And we have also obligations when we are giving something to the big companies. They have to know that we see through. So this is now an ongoing debate in Norway. But let me just say that we also have the obligation to take the necessary time in consultations with the Sami concerned. And I believe that we are doing so. And there are also things that we agree on. Let's just be honest about that. But my most important last take before I have to run to catch a plane, which leaves in 50 minutes, is that we are going to continue to live in the Arctic. And then we need all these things like energies. We need minerals. We need people who are taking their education here. We need teachers, doctors to actually see also NATO's plan through, because we are also NATO in the north. And that comes with great responsibility.
Minister Mirsad, thank you so much. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you
won't
so
keep
much
you
for having
anymore,
me.
and for wearing so many hats with us here on stage. Thank you. And perhaps it's a good place now to look at what is going on across Atlantic and listen to a few words by Senator Lisa Murkowski, who is a senator from Alaska, before I turn to you, Minister Braja, and the rest of the panelists. Let's take the temperature in the United States.
Well, hello, and thank you to Arctic Frontiers and to Anu for the opportunity to deliver these remarks today. I want to speak plainly about where we are today, not with optimism for optimism's sake, but with honesty about the moment that the Arctic is facing. The region now sits at the intersection of strategic competition, economic uncertainty, and alliance strain. We have gone from the edge of the map to the center of the world, as they say, in terms of diplomatic relationships, military postures, our markets, and the confidence that we place or don't place in one another. In recent weeks, American rhetoric has consumed oxygen that should be reserved for cooperation. Long-standing relationships, particularly with Denmark and Greenland, have been tested in ways that should concern anyone who's invested in Arctic stability. And this has distracted from priority issues and rattled the very foundations of NATO. Nothing has been gained from it, but plenty can be lost. Because trust, once shaken, is not easily restored. I've been in Copenhagen and Davos in just the past couple weeks. I've been on the phone and Zoom meetings and in meetings here in Washington, D.C., and I have heard the same message over and over again. Our allies are unsettled, not because the Arctic has become less important, but because predictability and partnership have been replaced, at least for now, by uncertainty and foreboding. So let me be clear about one thing. Greenland's future is not a transaction. Its path will be decided by its people, not by force, pressure, or leverage. Respect for sovereignty is not a courtesy, it is the foundation of alliance credibility. Now, I also want to affirm that you have real allies in the U.S. Congress. There are lawmakers from both parties who remain deeply committed to Arctic cooperation, to NATO unity, and to the principle that durable security comes from partnership, not possession. I don't want that to be discounted, how important that is. Congress doesn't always command all the attention. We certainly have our own problems, but we also have plenty of constitutional power. On our best days, we can make policy that endures, and our commitments to the Arctic, when it's serious, can be a stabilizing force. Arctic cooperation is challenged right now, but that's not cause to walk away. It's a time to look at the weak spots and address them, to take away the arguments and the allegations being made on defense, on trade, on growth, and more. Platforms like the Arctic Council also remain essential, not symbolic, but functional. They are where we sustain shared science, environmental stewardship, search and rescue coordination, and indigenous leadership. These are all additional ties that can bind. In the end, a fragmented Arctic benefits no one except adversaries and competitors who thrive on division. We know the pressures: Russia's expanding military footprint, China's strategic economic and scientific positioning, trade disruptions that hit northern communities first and hardest, to name just a few. And the answer to those pressures is not unilateral action or transactional diplomacy. It's not to rupture, but to coalesce. The answer is persistent cooperation, reinforced by shared institutions and sustained alliances. So let me leave you all with this. Yes, this is a difficult moment. And yes, there is turbulence, but it is not permanent. There are many in the United States who understand that Arctic stability is built slowly, collectively, and deliberately, and who are committed to seeing that work continue, no matter what. The Arctic's future will not be decided by a single individual or administration. It will be shaped by those who stay at the table, even when the room feels perhaps unsteady, because that is when you are needed even more than ever. Thank you so much.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, a refreshingly candid and steady, reliable voice on Arctic affairs in these unsettling times, of course. Foreign Minister Braja, Latvia is extremely engaged in Arctic security. How concerning is it for you, this break of trust that the senator alluded to between the United States and its European allies? How does it affect Arctic security potentially in the future?
Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers and to the Norwegian government for the warm welcome. It's my first time in the Arctic for myself, so I saw just a moment of something this morning, so I look forward to discussions in the Arctic University and a few meetings later on. And just to put things in perspective, it's 3 hours north from Riga, Latvia, where I come from, and it's 25 degrees warmer here than in Riga currently. So I'm quite pleased also for that reason to be here. Back to why I'm here and why Arctic is important for Latvia, and that's for a number of reasons. I mean, once we are allies, all of us, in NATO. We are the Nordics, Baltics, the closest related countries that we have. We have Canadian-led NATO multinational division in Latvia with 4,000 soldiers to make sure that Russia is deterred for any type of threats. NATO has repeated and restated again and again that Russia is the biggest threat to allies and to Euro-Atlantic security. So keeping all this in mind, obviously, we depart from the assumptions that being allies, if there are differing opinions, and there are differing opinions on quite a number of issues. We are 32 allies, you know, from Turkey up to Iceland. And everything can be solved among the allies through collaboration, through open dialogue, through sitting down and discussing issues. And that is the main principle that we depart from within NATO. And of course, territorial integrity, sovereignty, those issues, they are not debatable. That's the basis of any principle among the countries, among the governments, among international law, the basis of the UN Charter. So that's, you know, for us, that's
But
not even something to...
Have they been seriously undermined, though?
I think again, the big issue is really Russia's aggressive wars that Russia is conducting in Ukraine. I think we have to really keep our mind on that there is a conventional huge war ongoing on European territory. And with regard to Greenland, again, or with regard to other issues that are there among the allies, we depart from the fact there is the principle of sovereignty, territorial integrity that has been sacred for ever, at least as far as Latvia is concerned. Second, we are allies. If we are allies, we are able to solve the issues through the dialogue. If there are security and defense issues, we have to solve them also with our military sitting down, and we welcome very much yesterday's decision by NATO's SECURE, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, to start military planning for the Arctic mission of NATO. NATO and Arctic has been part of NATO's area of responsibility since the foundation of NATO. It's not a new type of issue. It's always there. It's NATO's responsibility as allies. So that's where I think for us, the sort of looking at the separate elements, but then looking also at it as a whole, where yes, there can be disagreements on certain issues, but they just have to be solved. And as you said, on internal Norwegian debates, yes, it's important to listen to each other. Yes, it's important to sit down and involve each other. And yes, it's important to find solutions. And for now, whether that's on Greenland or other issues in the Arctic, either on economy, either on the security, either on defense, there are particular points that we just need to sort of address. And especially on defense and security, I think one is strategic awareness. The Russian threat is real, and Norway knows it more than anybody else with regard to its border with Russia, with regard to the Russian capabilities that are there on the other side of the borders, the technological superiorities that we need for that capacity, both in terms of strategic awareness, but also in terms of ability to deter and, if necessary, defend. So there is a whole spectrum of issues that is best solved through sitting down and looking in detail. Okay, you think you have an issue? Okay, tell us. And that's why we welcome the direct dialogue between the Danes and the Americans, if there is something.
But let me ask you this, Foreign
these
Minister.
public statements, yes, they undermine trust, I would say, of course. I mean, if you want the short answer. But that's, again, there are so many issues.
Yeah, there are so many issues. But are nations in the region making the mistake, perhaps, of over-focusing on one threat, Russia, when there could be other threats from, you know, unusual players? Again, I may be referring to the big elephant in the room, but maybe not necessarily just the United States. But let's face it, do you need a change of thinking, strategic thinking, or is the status quo the way it's going to remain? And will it be to the benefit of the entire region? Because you have previously warned about hybrid threats. Your adversaries could also use some of your vulnerabilities, can they? Even with the new infrastructure that could be built, whether it's ports, airfields, communications, Russia could still use these pillars, couldn't it?
The so-called, so the Russian concept of warfare is one. I mean, it has conventional parts, it has unconventional parts, or so-called hybrid parts. And then, depending on the objectives, they use it in accordance with that doctrine. They first tried to take Ukraine by non-conventional means. Elections, hybrids, warfare in terms of cyber leaks, interference. 2014, they started with the so-called Green Man and so on and so forth. So the decision to take conventional warfare somewhere, it's only when you don't succeed by other means. So yes, we have to be very, very serious about the hybrid defense or protection against the hybrid threat. Whether that's on the cables, whether that's on the space, whether that's, today we saw that Russians are, trying to penetrate our satellites in Europe and for various means. So it's the total defense or comprehensive defense concept that we have, whether that's Finland, Norway, or the Baltics, is a way to answer. And that is awareness, and that is readiness, and that is taking it all seriously, very seriously.
Nathan Obaid, I want to turn to you and to talk to you about the Canadian government's new plans for investing more heavily in the defense sector in northern Canada. To what extent could this serve the interests of the Indigenous communities there? Because there's also legacies in there of mistrust. Have we gotten over that?
No, that's a pretty clear answer. I represent Canadian Inuit. We either own outright or co-manage 40% of Canada's territory. That's about 4 million square kilometers. And we do that through our constructive arrangements, through our modern treaties. This consideration for the new militarization of the Arctic is an extension of an existing military presence across Inuit Nunangat, our homeland. There are over 60 radar sites that are co-managed through NORAD between the US and Canada today. And there are now considerations by the Canadian government and with its partners for a reinvestment. The concerns that we have as Inuit go back to as far as the 1940s and 50s, when Canada and its allies in relation to World War II and the Cold War era did whatever they wanted in the Arctic and built directly in our homeland and then sometimes displaced us and our people and then left a mess. We don't want to see that happen again. We have tried over the last 50 years to mobilize politically and diplomatically to ensure that this moment is a moment where we use the constructive relationships and arrangements we have with Canada as a nation state to ensure that we have dual use infrastructure and that there is participation from Inuit in every step of the process. Because we, as my colleague has said, we want to be standing with Canada. We want to meet the threats, whatever they might be, but not at the expense of our well-being and our communities and our homeland.
How far are you from achieving some of these aims? We heard the Norwegian Prime Minister this morning say that the northern Canadian communities deserve to have the same, he said, good conditions, didn't he, as communities here in the High North. How far reality is that?
Well, there are 51 Inuit communities in Inuit Nunangat. There are only 2 that are accessible by road to southern Canada. Many don't have paved runways. There's only 1 deep water port. We have a TB rate of over 600 times the national average. We have a life expectancy of 10 years less than other Canadians. And we have high rates of poverty. We have not a full healthcare system. We basically have a referral system where there's nurses who refer patients to southern centers across all parts of southern Canada for actual healthcare. So no, we are not in any way close to bridging the infrastructure deficits that exist in our communities.
And so building the defense infrastructure is going to take away, perhaps?
I think there's...
Take away from the interest in the budget that you might require?
Well, tens of billions of dollars are going to be allocated by the Canadian government for defense or military purposes in the Arctic. Dual use is a term that the Canadian government has used widely but has not yet defined. We very clearly would like to see dual use include money for water and sewer, money for healthcare systems, money for ports and roads. because in the end, we are the basis and foundation of Canadian sovereignty in 40% of Canada. And that has to mean that the security of our people is also the foundation for any of the defense that Canada considers for Canada.
The human security. Samu Paukunen, to you, finally, from a Finnish perspective, what is the key pillar of this new Arctic infrastructure that is still missing?
Wow.
I thought it'd be an easy one for
I was
you.
hoping for
I thought it was a very
easier
easy one.
I think we are in a situation where the whole European security infrastructure has been destroyed. And that's been destroyed because of war of aggression. And now we are in a between phase. The old is gone, and we are yet to build the new security architecture. That's somewhere in the future. And we don't know when it is, what it looks like, but the only option for us now, at least from my perspective, is to build that kind of security architecture, military architecture, if I will, that will help us to deter the aggression so that it won't spread to these parts of the world. And at the same time, I think this is an opportunity for us to look at the building blocks of the old security architecture. Here in the north, we were really pushing for cooperation and coexistence. Barents Euro-Arctic Council was one of the tools for that. And from my perspective, also the Arctic Council itself, even though it was on scientific, on nature, and on conservation. And these elements need to be addressed. This is a perfect opportunity for that. I'm a little bit concerned that whilst Russia is engaging in war of attrition in Ukraine, whilst it is destroying the infrastructure and the living conditions of ordinary people far, far beyond any front line, while Russia is engaged in hybrid war against all of our nations, trying to inflict damage, trying to intimidate us, that what is the basis for the cooperation? I, of course, understand that we need the structures in place for the future yet to come. But do we use this opportunity? Or are we then building on the old remains when the time comes? I don't know. I don't have any answer for that one.
No, you seem to have a very good answer. And in fact, I know you'll have an answer for the next one because as a former NATO official, I know you focused on critical undersea infrastructure. And so we alluded to it a little bit with Foreign Minister Braja. Subsea cables are the backbone of Nordic digital infrastructure, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yet we had serious incidents, 2 of them, in 2024, where you had cables between Finland and Germany, and I believe Sweden and Lithuania, being damaged with signs of tampering. What are the lessons that have been learned there?
We need to be vigilant. We need to be able to deter also on the hybrid side. And then we need to close the window of opportunity, the space and time for any aggressor to operate in. And I think here, NATO has proven to be quite a successful tool. We were able to establish Baltic Sentry, which increased the presence of NATO troops in the Baltic Sea. We were able to come up with Task Force X, which is a project where unmanned vehicles are used to cover a broader area that would be possible otherwise. If I would be a betting man, I think these solutions could also be deployed here in the Arctic, in the high north, and the structures are already there. It's now only about the policies and decisions that need to be made. And with that regard, I think SACEUR's decision yesterday is a positive signal that might also somehow point the way out of this internal struggle that we've ended up in.
Samu, you mentioned briefly the Baltic Sentry. Foreign Minister Braja, how well is it working? And there is talk now from NATO and others that there could be a similar Arctic Sentry that could be useful.
Yeah, it's always a decision of the sort of military colleagues, because it depends on the threat and the best response. Because you don't plan something abstract, you plan against a concrete threat. So also on the Arctic, it will be against a specific threat or to deter something. And in the Baltic case, that worked because there was specific threat, which were the Russian ships, and they were indeed increasing their presence, and there were mysterious violations and mysterious breakages of the cables. Since the operation started, there has been no violation, no breakage. There was, due to the storm, so a natural cause for certain interruption. And on our side, also our cable between us and Sweden was broken. What helped was that we were ready. Preparedness was there. That our company had tested the sort of alternative solutions if something like that happens. So we actually didn't suffer any data loss or damage or anything. We were ready for it. But there were other issues that we went through, you know, the communications with our allies, which institutions, the algorithm of how you respond, the law enforcement, so civil military algorithm, you know, how do you respond, because it will be a civil damage most of the cases, because those cables are mostly owned by private sector. Or critical infrastructure. So, you know, that helped again to go into the next stage of preparedness. So this is, I think, through the exercises, tests, and also the military presence and deterrence, how we all become safer.
So as a former NATO official yourself, would you recommend
what I would recommend?
I would recommend the system be relocated.
I would recommend also for the Arctic Sentry, actually for the allies who get involved, to really test against concrete scenarios. And it's civil military, it will be very much with the local, should be very much around the local communities, around the dual use, the space, the situational awareness issues, because again, that brings the whole preparedness to a different level, and it works. But also one issue I think that we discussed at the beginning with the minister is people in the north, or we have that, you know, Latvia is quite big for our territory. We are twice as big as Belgium or the Netherlands for that matter, but 1.8 million people. Yeah, so not very densely populated, and especially in the eastern parts of Latvia. And one thing that we invested is technology and access to services where you don't have to physically move to a local government, so that you can live in your village and have full access of services through electronic signatures, digital IDs, literally everything. And then once you actually need to go to the hospital, yes, to have the roads, yes, to have the service, but also to prevent as much as possible, you know, the fact that people just not leave because they are not able to access something. And for the education, for health, for local government, I think that is a big relief, the current technological advance.
And speaking of making sure that people don't leave, we want to pause for a second or two to hear the messages of young Arctic emerging leaders from many different countries, including 5 indigenous groups, their perspectives on what is being done right and what isn't.
Tensions are rising in the Arctic. We do not have the infrastructure we need to meet security demands.
The window for a just transition is closing. But what means security to you?
Security in the Arctic depends on international cooperation, shared values, and respect for international law.
How can we welcome friends and allies into our region without compromising the rights of the people living here?
I live in the Bering Strait. I see increasing vessel traffic and military activity. To me, Arctic security is safe and clean water, so I can continue harvesting wild salmon with my daughter.
Our Arctic security requires reliable and collaborative capabilities in air, land, sea, and space to be prepared and respond swiftly to threats to life and safety, from saving a fisherman in distress to securing a compromised border.
The Arctic is rich in energy and mineral resources. Safe and responsible extraction depends on sustained local presence and resilient communities.
Dependence on sparse, fragile infrastructure for our security is no longer an option. I'm from Kirkenes, a Norwegian town 5 kilometers away from the Russian border and 100 kilometers away from the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Kirkenes has at many points been called strategically important, both by Norway and its allies. However, Arctic priority has not been seen except for in increased high-level official visits and increased defense presence. But we need true investments in infrastructure, in energy supply, and in people. If the Arctic security truly is a priority, that needs to be showcased, not just in words, but in action.
Arctic security is everyone's concern. What are you willing to compromise? And how do we turn that compromise into collaboration?
Silje Mutka, how do we turn compromise into collaboration?
Well, I do think that we must address the. I was struck by the message from the young leader from Kirkenes. I'm also born in that particular area, and I think for indigenous communities and communities in the Arctic, security cannot be reduced to military presence alone. It has to be. It also has to contain reliably functioning transport and communication. We need food security and communities that can endure strain over time. And I do think that we have resilience in the ways of life and our knowledge, and we are true experts on surviving under these conditions in this area. So I think the paradox is how hard regulated our hunting and fishing are, and why the government, when they are assessing preparedness, how come they don't want to learn about the teachings we have and how to survive in this area. I think that is quite remarkable. But we are not passive, waiting for the government, I must say that. The next plenary session, we have a rather lengthy paper on preparedness and security politics in our parliament.
So on a practical level, how can Sami knowledge, and what you've just alluded to, reindeer herding, contribute to this total preparedness?
Yes.
What can it bring to the table that is being missed by decision makers?
Well, I'm a sea Sami myself, and there's a big debate that we cannot only focus on the herders, but we have survival skills in all disciplines in the Arctic. And what I find is that it is important to ask the question if any child in the Arctic, whatever kind of ethnicity they are from, are they able to fish and prepare a fish themselves? That is a very good question, because I do think that, unfortunately, we will find that a high percentage under 35 years old, they are not able to either fish or prepare the fish themselves.
Okay. You heard one of our emerging leaders talk about the need to make compromise, but turning compromise into collaboration. You said earlier in this session, you said that the Sami Parliament isn't necessarily against infrastructure investment and building, but against not being involved correctly, in the right way, in the process. Explain to us how the process should be done in simple terms, and how we can make compromises for future investments.
Yes, I do think that we have some framework things to clear out. The rights that we have, it has to be clear and accepted, and then we are in a position to better have those kind of discussions.
Practically, what does it mean?
It means that in Finnmark, for instance, there is a commission going through all the land rights claims. We have trials following up on that, and I do think we have to reach a point where we have accepted and adapted indigenous rights, and then those compromises, if everyone is looking for a compromise, I think it's very important that you are not compromising on things that are non-negotiable. And international law is non-negotiable. For Norway and for the Scandinavian countries, we are small countries. We need to exercise practices we want others to exercise and respect international law within our own context. But we are ready to contribute within the defense training. We can contribute with courses, and we can contribute with our knowledge, and also actively support strong and good defense in the Nordic context.
Okay. From your perspective, Nathan, you heard some of the key messages from the youth leaders. We talked about compromise and the need for compromise. Are Inuit communities being asked to compromise a little too much? And which of these messages that you heard today resonated the most with you?
I think the first compromise is that we have to accept that in the nation states that we live, there is still a paternalistic attitude towards diplomacy. And that when Canada goes out into the world, whether the United Nations, Arctic Council, NATO, that it somehow does not have to allow for Inuit participation when considering deliberations on the Arctic. I also think in any country, in any nation state that has indigenous peoples, this is a key aspect of moving forward that is underutilized today. When we think of diplomacy, we think of maybe democracies and like-minded democracies being diplomatic with one another. Perhaps there is trade. Perhaps there's a common culture for people who've moved from one country to another. There are indigenous peoples in many countries in this world, but the considerations of nation states has been that we are a lower tier of consideration and not quite able to be a central part of diplomacy.
And is this a reality that you do accept, or that you are still proactively trying to change?
Well, I think many people have listened to Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum, and he talked about the sign in the window. And for indigenous peoples, the sign in the window is that the nation state that we live in, because we have, generally speaking, good relations, that it can do whatever it wants on the world stage or about our lands and our considerations without us. And we have constructive arrangements to the opposite. So mobilizing on the strengths of the relationship with indigenous people is not something that many nation states are willing or able to consider. As far as what I've heard today, I've heard a lot of constructive solutions for the challenges of our times. And I think of communities as being an essential piece across the Arctic, no matter if it's here in Norway or if it's in Canada, Alaska, or in Kalathiit Nunaat, that we live in a different time. The idea of imperialism or the idea of conquest or manifest destiny or doctrine of discovery, those very rightly belong in the 16th and 17th century. And how we push back against some of the language that we hear, whether it be from the United States or other nation states with nefarious intent, is to lean into the arrangements that we have made that describe a new way of thinking about a nation state and a new way of thinking about territorial sovereignty.
It's a very fine balance, difficult for states, local, obviously national governments, regional, international institutions to meet all of these needs while making sure they don't trample on the needs, concerns, and rights of indigenous people. Can I turn to you, Dr. Paukkunen, and then to you, Minister Braja, again? Both former NATO officials, how do you see the future of NATO and its ability to defend the Arctic without over-militarizing it? And give us your sense about the solution to protecting cable infrastructure. Is there a diplomatic solution to it?
Well, if starting from the cables, I can't see a situation where diplomacy would be a solution, at least when the threat picture is what it is. So the only solution is that we would have a capability to pre-warn. Would there be a sign of aggression that's going towards any of the infrastructure, and then the nation in charge would have a time window to prevent or at least have the possibility to inform the Navy captain or the captain of the ship that this is already seen. So this would be addressing the problem of attribution, which is something that the aggressors have been able to hide behind. Hopefully we are there soon. And I know that much of resources in all of allied countries are put also to solve this issue. And then this is the strength of 32. That's the combined might of the all allied countries. Give us time and we will come up with a solution. And also I think this applies for the Arctic in large. I think this is also one of those areas where NATO can do a contribution, a constructive contribution. None of the taxpayers would want to do that. This Russian aggression is costing us hundreds of billions of euros combined. Only the Nordic countries combined have had to invest and are about to invest tens of billions of euros. Latvia is doing more than 5% already now. Even Portugal has promised to go for the 5%.
Is there a long-term downside to all of the investments that are being made currently?
I think the perspective is very clear. We all want to live peacefully in prosperity, you know, our children to have futures that where their studies or whatever futures they choose, that they can expect it to be fulfilled. For that, security is the basis. Security and defense has been something that NATO has provided. That's the single most important KPI that is expected of NATO as an alliance. And we achieve that by working together. So putting, whether that's intelligence information, whether that's our scientific technological knowledge, whether that's our militaries sharing the best that they have in terms of working together and understanding each other and planning together. But that is something that is unparalleled and that hasn't existed before. And that's part of this, you know, post-Second World War lessons that security and defense is essential also for the rest of success of our societies, for democracy, for, you know, something that we want to last. So for now, that requires, yes, additional investments in hard defense capabilities, because there is a country that has shown that it doesn't shy from bombarding an innocent neighbor and trying, openly announcing that it wants to extinguish Ukraine from the earth. Simple as that. And if it can do that to Ukraine, yes, it's a threat for the rest of us who are trying to help that not to happen. So that's why for NATO has been a leader both in terms of getting allies, you know, to invest in defense, but also to be much more serious about the whole society readiness for various crises. And that readiness and preparedness mentality, we cannot delegate it to someone else. It's collective, it's individual, it's for the scientists, it's for the NGOs, it's for everyone, because at the end we are in it together. We want the peace to reign.
briefly, Minister, do you foresee NATO surviving these transatlantic rifts with the United States for very much longer? I mean, does there have to be a new rethink about what binds NATO together? Because there are people who are beginning to wonder if this is the beginning of the end of the North Atlantic Alliance as we know it.
You know, we found a quote somewhere in the 60s by JFK, who said that Europeans have been living off a fat of the US for far too long in not investing in defense. So that is not new a message from the US administration that Europeans have to invest and be serious about their defense, because when we see that this proportion, both in numbers and capabilities and everything, is just not justifiable. Mm-hmm. Why would we expect somebody else to fund us and to defend us if we are not serious ourselves? That's something where we fully align with the US message. Yes, I mean, this administration comes out and words it in a very different way than other administrations. But again, when we go back and look at what Dwight Eisenhower, you know, how he engaged with the capitals and what he was doing and saying to push for SHAPE's military integration and joint military planning, those were not very sort of usual expressions that we use in diplomacy. So we have to give account to there are some serious messages we need to heed. Then on the other side, on the, as I said, on the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and if those messages are repeated, of course, it's not something that is acceptable or understandable. But again, going back in the history, when we look at Suez, when we look at a number of other situations within NATO countries, there have been, you know, when we were at NATO together, you know, among a couple of nations in NATO, there is a constant tension, and then, you know, they are sat down, you know, on the sidelines, and sometimes through the military, through the other sources, and then they find out how to deal with those.
This does seem to be quite different, though.
Yeah,
unusual, undiplomatic talk that some
again,
people call bullying, but at least it's a wake-up call, as you say, for Europe. Minister, allow me to just move once again to Silje. And I know that has been talk, and in fact, an official request by the Sami parliament to try to make sure that NATO involves you more in the decision-making, in the consultations. Is this something that matters a lot to indigenous groups that you represent? How likely is this to ever happen?
I would say I am also currently acting president of the Sami Parliamentary Council, which consists of the political leadership in the 3 Sami parliaments in both the Swedish side and Finnish side and Norwegian side. And that issue is often addressed within that context. Mm-hmm. So what's important for us is that the participation is aligned with the national states that we are living within. I think that is important due to the fact that we have other discussions and challenges that I think it will be a wise thing to be aligned with the national states we are living in on that issue. I would say that in the Arctic, I think the most important capital we can have is all the investment into trust. But if we invest into trust, that trust cannot be misused. And I think indigenous rights consultation and participation, they are not the obstacles to security. Anyone who is advocating and talking that kind of talk, they are undermining trust, and they are also creating a picture of problem that is not accurate in my point of view. Because we are part of what can make security stable, sustainable, legitimate, and resilient over time. And our knowledge in this area is crucial and vital in order to understand and to survive in this area. We will participate in all kind of processes we can, as far as we can, and especially try to ensure that the trust is the most important capital we have.
Nathan, to you, final thoughts on how you build the trust?
starts with our constructive arrangements, and each nation state has constructive arrangements with its indigenous peoples. What position or what that looks like is very, very different, even within the context of the Arctic and the circumpolar Arctic. But for a Canadian Inuit, we have tried, especially during the quote-unquote reconciliation era of the Trudeau government, to create structures that last. So we created an Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, where Inuit leadership is on one side, the Prime Minister and Ministers of the Cabinet are on the other. We decide what are our shared priority areas and create work plans to implement them. Security and defense is one of them. We also have co-developed legislation. We also have worked together on the Arctic foreign policy. We now have a renewed Arctic ambassador, thanks to the co-developed language that Inuit and the Government of Canada created together. Virginia Mearns is here at this conference, and just give her a shout out. But these are the types of incremental...
So there is light at the end of
these
the tunnel,
incremental positive changes that, and opportunities, I would say, that exist in any democracy, in any scenario, because we're all on a journey that leads to greater cooperation, greater respect for our rights, and also just to strengthen the nation states in which we live.
Thank you so much. Samu, to you. In 30 seconds or less, from a policy perspective.
About hope.
Hope, trust, what needs to change?
Well, as a Finn, I'm always optimistic, of course.
And happy.
and I do believe that there is this possibility for us to build it back better, build it back stronger, do it in a way that takes into consideration the rights of all the people here in the Arctic, that will enable us then the sustainable use of this region, and do it in a way that still keeps the aggressor away and keeps us within the same table. And in that table, hopefully we will be able to also continue the discussions that we had here like 10 years ago, hopefully.
And turning these wonderful statements into action. Over to you. Finally, how do you do this, Foreign Minister?
I think one thing that we've been doing through Latvian diplomacy is to constantly engage with our allies, partners across the world to make sure that early on we identify the issues that might arise and try to sort of prevent or clear them if they arise. And also in our relationship with the US, you know, substantial cooperation on a variety of issues, including on defense and security, but also making sure that we work with both parties across the board. So very large bipartisan cooperation politically and in the administration, but also through our communities. We have large communities of the Balts in the US who are both dual citizens. So we make sure that we hear from them, that they engage, that we are an active presence also on the other side of the ocean. And that is for one purpose. We are stronger together. When transatlantic, it's a transatlantic security. So we are able to solve all the issues, not through loud statements, not through, you know, escalation sort of spiral, but actually through, okay, Canada has an issue. Okay, let's sit down. We talk to Canada and try to understand what is the issue, what is the best way to... Because there are no closer friends or partners or allies like us. And I think that is the mentality we go for. But we also try to do our share in the Arctic. Our scientists work in Svalbard. Our Hydroecology Institute works on POPs, which is persistent organic pollutants, and their effect, you know, through the microplastics on the Arctic waters and beyond. And only through collaboration, again, you can achieve something that is best for all of us. So that is the basis how we perceive our security, but also sort of joint work elsewhere. And technologically, we are the strongest that can be. So let's turn that into advantage also in all the other parts, for the people, for the deterrence, you know, for the security. and for the future.
Thank you, Foreign Minister. A lot of challenges, but opportunities as well. It does sound like walking on ice at the moment, but at least it's good to know that we're on the right path. Thank you all very much indeed for this fascinating conversation, and thank you for being here.